here we are for World War I, Part 4. We're moving on to, and you really should be following a thing like looks like this. History 1302 Class Notes Worksheet, Unit II.C, World War I. Okay, the second part of it is viewing the war from afar. How did the American public respond to the war? We're intensely interested in it. But what's missing from the picture is any idea on the part of very many people at all that we would end up participating in it. All right, that wasn't in the cards. It was a European war. It involves nations where many of us, where our ancestors came from, so we're following it with intense interest. But this is not too much of an overstatement. Let's say it's the afternoon of the Super Bowl, and you settled into your recliner with the refreshments of your choice, and you're watching the kickoff in the first quarter, and somebody wants to know what are the odds that before that game is over, you yourself, you will be suited up on the field playing in that game. Somewhere between 0 and 0. That is an overstatement, but it's kind of what it was. So, and we wouldn't have taken the bait on that. Nobody had a problem with President Wilson keeping us out. Now, there were a few. Old Theodore Roosevelt still alive, and he wanted us to get involved, and a few people thought we should, but the American public at large doesn't want to do that. Okay, but we take sides. Not everybody does, but a lot of people do, despite our official policy of neutrality and the president asking us to be neutral in thought as well as in action. Sorry, that's unrealistic. But as the war went on, we tended to support the Allies. Okay, I just realized I got to establish who's who. Britain, France, and Russia, who had been the Triple Entente, they make up the Allies, capital A. So to speak of the Allies, we're talking about the British, the French, and the Russians. Okay? Germany and Austria-Hungary are the Central Powers. Italy was, by treaty obligations, supposed to have sided with them, but Italy, as I told you, just stayed on the sidelines for the first couple of years. Other countries joined the Allies as we went along. Italy did. Other countries joined the Central Powers. So they don't play major roles. Okay, most Americans tended to support the Allies at the start, and that continued to grow as the war went on. Not everybody will get to the people who went the other way, but here you go. For one thing, there are ties of blood and culture. More Americans either had ancestors from the British Isles or believed that they did than any other identity. So you have that. From Britain, we got our language, we got our political heritage. We went way back with them, so naturally we're going to side with them. And France. The French can kind of be hard to be around sometimes, but people remembered that without their help, we might not have been able to win our independence. And a lot of Americans really seriously felt that there was a debt of gratitude still waiting to be paid to France. A little anecdote to illustrate that. When we finally did join the war, and eventually American troops went over to France, the first ones to get off the boat, there's this little ceremony welcoming them. And I have to remind you that there was a young French nobleman, the Marquis de Lafayette, who became one of Washington's trusted officers during the Revolutionary War, and he personified French assistance. Anyway, the commander of the first contingent of American troops to arrive in France, part of his speech he concluded with the words, "Lafayette, we're here." Chills down the spine, all of that. So there's that. There's the fact that the Western Allies, the British and the French, had governments that were basically like ours. Now, the British still had a monarchy, but that was just ceremonial. They resemble us in having a constitutional republic. So does France. So that side looked like the kind of government we would prefer. We're not really thinking about Russia because the Tsar, we're on their side too. That was the most autocratic despot of all. Meanwhile, Germany and Austria-Hungary were both absolute monarchies, where hereditary kings or emperors, the Kaiser was an emperor, um, where there's basically no democracy at all. So this looks like it's shaping up like this titanic struggle between democracy and totalitarianism. That means where the government it tries to control everything. That was more in theory than in fact, but there you go. So you had that. Um, Germany's use of technology began to alienate people. Not that both sides didn't use technology, but um, Germany was forging ahead with it because they're kind of painted into a corner here. They're doing what they have to do. So this along the way, the war stops being a boxing match with padded gloves, rules, and everything but a referee. It becomes a grudge match. It becomes an alley fight with weapons of opportunity. So the Germans were first to deploy gas. First stuff they use called mustard gas. If you breathe it, it'll sear your lungs. It can blind you. And they got more deadly forms of gas later. Turn the thing. Hope that when the wind's blowing toward the other side's lines, if the wind changes, you're in trouble. Um, but the soldiers. I mean, people think what the impact this has on people who'd been so confident that we were more civilized, more scientific, more advanced than we'd ever been. War was the thing of the past. They see pictures of soldiers. They got their helmets. They're covered in foot. They've got gas masks with a canister or goggles. They look more like ants than humans. And that was the reality of it. The weapons. The German machine guns were probably better, but the idea of warfare involving personal bravery, exposing yourself to enemy fire in a colorful uniform, that goes down very quickly. You just can't do that. So armies, just to stay alive, are forced to entrench, to dig their trenches and all of that. That would have been considered utter cowardice, only maybe a couple of generations before. Both sides used aircraft, and the Germans came up. See, if you got your machine gun or machine guns right in front of the pilot, you're going to shoot your propeller blades off. The Germans timed their machine guns to the timing of the engine, so the weapon fires when the propeller's like this instead of like that. Both sides end up doing that. That was picturesque. That was kind of the last gasp of feudal chivalry. If a respected enemy pilot is shot down and they're going to have his little funeral service, an enemy plane will come over and wag its wings and drop a wreath. There's a movie about that. It's called Flyboys. It's not that old, and it's a fictionalized version of Americans who volunteered to fly with the French before the United States joined the war. They formed a unit of Americans called the Lafayette, that name again, the Lafayette Escadrille. And it included a black man who was a very fine pilot. So that's worth the look. It gives you the look and feel. It's not going to give you any actual historical details. Okay. The technology that got the Germans in the most trouble, that they made the most use of, was a type of naval vessel, which they referred to in their language as an Unterseeboot, undersea boat, U-boat, submarine. Now, several of the world's more advanced navies, including our own, had been experimenting with submarines as far back as the 1890s. And in fact, in 1864, and this wasn't even part of the Confederate Navy, as part of the Army, a submersible craft sank a Union blockade vessel in Charleston Harbor in 1864. There are a lot more stories I could tell you about that, and it itself did not survive. But the Germans had submarines. Now, Germany and Austria-Hungary both are effectively landlocked because of what the British fleet could do to blockade them. Austria-Hungary might have had some frontage on the Mediterranean, but you can't get out to the sea because The Suez Canal belongs to the British and French, and they're trying to get through that. The Strait of Gibraltar, where Africa comes up and meets Spain, just almost like that, you're not going to get through there either. Germany would have to either get out through the English Channel, and let's just say there's no chance there. At its narrowest points, you can see across the English Channel on a clear day. It's about 30 miles. So that's not going to do it. They could also get out through something called the North Sea. And if you have the map showing World War One, it's between Britain and like Norway up there. The British Navy had laid a barrage of mines across there, so it's borders on being suicidal to try to drive a ship through there without a British pilot aboard. But the submarines could submerge, and at first they did that just as a stealth measure so they would not be detected by surface ships. Then once they're past that, they would do what they would do on the surface. And the Germans, at first, the first few months, they are following the rules of warfare. Warfare had rules. They're informal. There's nobody going to throw a penalty flag. But the German submarines were trying to interdict British shipping or Allied shipping. You get to do that, all right? Now, the way it was supposed to work, let's say an armed naval vessel flying the flag of one belligerent country at war encounters a supposedly unarmed merchant vessel flying the flag of an opposing belligerent. Okay, the warship fires a warning shot. They're not trying to sink them, just fire a warning shot that signals them to come to a full stop and submit to a search. If they don't stop, they're fair game. You can put them down. So the Germans are doing that. They get out and fire their little deck gun, and it take them half a day to put enough holes to a merchant ship to sink it. It's all kind of a charade. And then they can search the merchant vessel, and if they find anything on a list of goods categorically termed contraband, then they could legally sink the ship, but only after allowing the crew and any passengers that might be aboard to get off on lifeboats. Okay, they were doing that. But it's a mismatch. These submarines are small, they're fragile, they just tip over a little bit too far to one side, they can go down. A merchant vessel is much larger, and if they get a good angle on it, they could ram and sink a submarine and keep on going. So, in fact, the head of the British Navy was Winston Churchill, who will be Prime Minister next time around. He came up with a bright idea. Why don't we put naval guns on our merchant ships so they can shoot the submarines? Problem with that is, if you arm a merchant vessel in time of war, it's not a merchant vessel anymore. It's a warship, and a submarine could sink it without surfacing, which seemed very cowardly, but what else are you going to do? So, the thing that put this in the headlines took place on May 7th, 1915, when the largest, fastest passenger ship in service on the North Atlantic was torpedoed and sunk by a German submarine. The name of the ship was the Lusitania. Put it on the screen there. They were coming in from New York. They're going along the southern coast of Ireland. It's a fast ship. No submarine could possibly keep up with it. They thought speed would protect them. So they're getting close to home, and passengers are, having their breakfast and all that, and they hear a small explosion, ripples in the water glass, that sort of thing, because a German submarine has torpedoed them. Now, sinking a passenger ship? The Germans didn't realize at first what a firestorm that's going to cause. But there's a small explosion followed by bang, much larger explosion. The ship heels over to one side. The lifeboats are almost useless because the ones on the high side have to practically roll down the side of the ship. The ones on the low side are hanging out far over the water. You can't get to them. That ship was down in 18 minutes. It's about 4/5 the size of the Titanic, which lingered nearly 2 hours. Okay? There were survivors, but over 1,100 people, I think it was over 1,200, died on the Lusitania. 128 of them were Americans. Some of them were very prominent people, and I'm going to have to stop.